Ever found yourself completely convinced of something, but, without quite knowing why?
Hmm.
Maybe it's a gut feeling about someone, or just this absolute certainty that if you drop your keys, they will fall.
Right, that feeling of necessity.
Or maybe you felt that kind of strange mix of pleasure and, I guess, self-satisfaction from owning something nice, like a beautiful object, and wondered where that feeling comes from.
Yeah, or even bigger picture, how societies, how they even work. With all the competing interests, how do we end up with rules that stick?
Exactly. These aren't like small questions, are they?
No, not at all. They point to the fundamental wiring beneath our everyday experience, how we form beliefs, what drives our emotions, and the very basis of our social order.
And today, we're plunging deep into the mind of a philosopher who really dared to ask these questions,
Hmm.
often landing on answers that were, well, pretty revolutionary, maybe even scandalous back then.
Definitely. We're exploring the insights of David Hume, looking directly at selections from his huge work, A Treatise of Human Nature.
Our source material comes from key parts of that treatise, right? Where he breaks down the mind, our passions, and then morality and society.
That's right, covering the understanding, the passions, and morals as he structured it.
So consider us your guides for this.
Yeah.
Our mission is to sort of cut through some of maybe the density of the text and help you pull out the really potent ideas.
Yeah, Hume's surprising claims about the limits of reason, the incredible power of imagination and feeling.
And where our sense of truth, our deepest emotions, even justice itself might actually come from. It's quite a ride.
It is, and this deep dive, it's really crafted for you, the curious mind. Whether you're tackling this for work or just chasing those aha moments about being human.
Think of it as a shortcut, maybe, to getting a handle on Hume's radical perspective, with just enough detail to hopefully make it memorable.
So we'll follow Hume's path. First, the basics, how we get ideas, how they connect.
Then dive into the often messy world of feelings and desires.
And finally, tackle his really groundbreaking and maybe, yeah, unsettling views on society and right and wrong.
Okay, let's get into it. Let's unpack this.
Right, let's start at the very beginning for Hume. The raw material of our mental life.
So Hume kicks things off by sorting everything in our minds into two basic types, doesn't he?
Exactly. He calls them all perceptions. And these perceptions are either impressions or ideas.
Okay, impressions, those are the vivid ones, like the immediate feeling, a sudden pain, a bright flash, that first taste of something completely new.
Precisely. Impressions hit the mind with the most force and liveliness. Sensations, emotions, feelings, the direct experience.
And ideas are,
Ideas are the fainter copies. They're what we use when we think about that pain later, or remember the flash, or recall the taste. Thinking, reasoning, remembering that uses ideas.
and the core principle, the big rule he sets up, is that all our ideas have to come from impressions first.
That's absolutely fundamental for Hume. He argues you can't form a proper, a just idea, as he puts it, of something like the taste of pineapple unless you've actually had the impression. You've got to taste it. The experience comes first.
Though I think I remember him flagging one little exception, something about shades of blue.
Ah, yes, the famous missing shade of blue. He acknowledges this one kind of contradictory phenomenon where someone who's seen all other shades of blue might be able to imagine the missing one.
But he doesn't throw out the whole theory because of it.
No, he treats it as a singular instance, maybe a bit peculiar, but doesn't think it overturns the general rule that ideas derive from impressions.
Okay, so we have impressions and they're fainter copies, ideas.
Yeah.
But our thoughts aren't just a random jumble, right? They seem connected. How does that happen?
Good question. No, they're not random. Hume says there's an associating quality, a kind of gentle force, he calls it, that links ideas. It guides the train of thought.
A gentle force. I like
Yeah.
that. And this is where he talks about the different ways ideas relate to each other.
Exactly. He outlines 7 philosophical relations. These are the ways we compare ideas. There's resemblance, which he thinks is foundational.
Like seeing one portrait reminds you of another.
Right. Then identity, relations of space and time, quantity or number, quality, contrariety, like black and white.
And the big one, cause and effect.
Yes, cause and effect. And interestingly, he sees difference not as a relation itself, but more like the absence of relation. Resemblance, though, he sees as key. Without it, none of the others could really work.
What about abstract ideas? Like the general idea of dog or justice. Philosophers before him often talked about these as if they were pure concepts existing somewhere.
Hume has a really different, much more down-to-earth view. He argues that what we call an abstract idea is actually just a particular idea, like your image of a specific dog.
like my neighbor's beagle.
Maybe. And that particular idea gets linked to a general term, like dog. The word allows that specific image in your head to represent all dogs because they share certain features, they resemble each other in key ways.
So no perfect dogness floating around, just specific dog examples linked by a word.
That's the essence of it. It keeps things grounded in experience.
And this grounding leads to some interesting takes on space and time, too, doesn't it? He seems skeptical of thinking about them as purely abstract.
Very skeptical. He argues our idea of space or extension isn't from some abstract grid of points. It has to be tied to things we can see or touch colored or tangible objects. It comes from our senses.
And time.
Time similarly requires change, a succession of perceivable objects or events. You can't have an idea of time passing without something happening. He really doubts ideas like infinite divisibility of space or time, suggesting they might lead to absurdities if you push them too hard.
Okay, here's one that always trips me up. He claims we don't actually have a separate idea of existence. How does that work?
Yeah, it's counterintuitive, isn't it? His point is that thinking of something automatically includes thinking of it as existing. You don't have the idea chair and then add another idea existence to it.
So the idea of the chair already implies its existence.
For Hume, yes. The idea of the chair is the idea of an existing chair. Conceiving it is conceiving it as existent. It's not a separate component you tack on.
Wow, okay. So if belief isn't about adding the idea of existence, what is the difference between just imagining something like, I don't know, a unicorn and actually believing it's real?
This is a huge part of his theory. It's not about what idea you have, but how you have it. Belief, for Hume, is about the feeling of the idea.
The feeling.
Yes, an idea that you believe has more force, more firmness, more vivacity than a mere fiction conjured by the imagination.
Vivacity, like it's brighter, more intense in the mind.
Exactly. Think about reading a really engaging novel versus reading a true historical account. The ideas, the scenes might be similar, but the ideas in the history book feel different. They have that extra weight, that firmness, that vivacity. That feeling is the belief.
So our sense of what's real boils down to how strongly an idea hits us.
In a fundamental way, yes. Or how vividly it's conceived, often due to its connection with a present impression or memory.
Which brings us to cause and effect. This is maybe his most famous argument, right? That we don't figure out causality through pure logic.
Absolutely. This is where he really shakes things up. He says, look, if you saw, say, water for the very first time, no amount of reasoning about the water itself would tell you it could drown someone or that it extinguishes fire. Reason alone, looking a priori, can't reveal those connections.
So where does our certainty come from? Why are we so sure flicking a switch will turn on the light?
Experience. Pure and simple. We see the constant conjunction of events. We flick the switch, the light comes on, again and again.
Okay, we see the pattern. But how does that become a feeling of necessity? Like, it must happen next time.
That's the crucial step. Through seeing this constant conjunction, our mind develops a habit, a customary transition. When we see the cause, flicking the switch, our mind is automatically, through custom, carried to the idea of the effect, the light coming on.
And the belief, the feeling it will happen.
Yeah. That belief, that feeling of necessity arises from this very custom. It's an internal feeling, an impression of the mind being determined by habit to move from one idea to the other. That's the source of our idea of power or necessary connection.
So the power isn't in the switch or the wiring.
Not that we can observe directly. The feeling of necessity, Hume argues, comes from inside us, from this mental habit. We then mistakenly project this internal feeling onto the objects themselves. He calls that false philosophy. And this custom can get so strong it just happens, without us even thinking about it.
So much for pure reason running the show. It sounds like habit is king.
For cause and effect, Hume makes a powerful case that it is. It's a profoundly skeptical view of our knowledge.
And he doesn't stop there, does he? He questions our belief in, like, the external world continuing to exist when we're not looking. My desk is still here when I close my eyes. Or is it?
Right. He asks, how do you know? Your senses only give you snapshots, interrupted perceptions. You see the desk, you look away, the perception is gone. Reason, he argues, can't logically prove a continuously existing independent object just from those fleeting inputs.
So where does that belief come from then? It feels pretty solid.
Hume attributes it to a fiction of the imagination. The mind notices that when you look back, the perception of the desk is really similar to the one you had before. It resembles it strongly.
Okay.
So the imagination, seeking smoothness and coherence, kind of papers over the gaps. It attributes identity and continuous existence to the object, confusing the resemblance of interrupted perceptions with the identity of a single, enduring thing.
Wow. A fiction of the imagination. That's unsettling.
It is. He admits he gets tangled up himself when trying to apply the same logic to our idea of personal identity, the feeling of being the same self over time. He famously calls it a labyrinth.
It really seems like imagination is doing some heavy lifting in our basic understanding of reality.
It plays a much more fundamental role in Hume's system than just, making up stories.
And that idea of power or efficacy we mentioned with cause and effect, the feeling of the mind being determined.
Yes, that's crucial. He insists this idea of power doesn't come from observing something in the objects. We don't see the force transferring from one billiard ball to the next.
So where does the idea come from?
It arises from an internal impression. It's the feeling within our own mind, as custom carries it from the idea of the cause to the idea of the effect. That determination we feel internally is the origin of the idea of power. We then wrongly attribute that feeling to the external world.
This all seems to point towards some pretty deep skepticism. If reason is limited, if reality and causality are built on imagination and habit, how can we be sure of anything?
Hume absolutely acknowledges this. He sees that if you push philosophical reasoning really hard, questioning your own faculties, questioning the basis of knowledge, you can end up in a state of profound doubt. Skepticism seems like the logical conclusion.
But, we don't live like that. We still manage to get through the day.
Exactly. And Hume points this out too. Nature, he says, is stronger than philosophical reason. Our instincts, our habits, the basic needs of daily life, even just the mind's inability to sustain that intense level of doubt, they all pull us back.
So we act on beliefs because
Right.
we have to.
Right.
Or maybe it's just easier.
Pretty much. Nature compels us. Or sometimes, he suggests, the sheer pleasure and curiosity of doing philosophy makes us engage with these ideas, even if they lead to skepticism. It's a fascinating tension.
It really paints a picture of a mind where reason isn't the sole ruler. Habit, experience, feeling, imagination, they're all shaping our world.
He definitely turns the traditional view on its head.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit from how we think to how we feel. Section 2. The inner stirrings Hume on the passions. He has this really intricate theory for passions like pride and humility, doesn't he? The double relation thing.
Yes, the double relation theory is absolutely key to how he explains pride, humility, love, and hatred, what he calls indirect passions. It explains how external things cause these feelings in us.
Double relation. Okay, break that down for us.
So he argues that for a passion like pride to get triggered, you need two different connections happening at once. First, a relation of ideas. The cause of the passion, let's say, a beautiful house you own, or maybe an award you won.
Something external.
Right. That cause must be related to the subject of the passion. And for pride and humility, the subject is always the self. So it has to be your house, your award.
Okay, relation 1. The cause connects to me. What's the second relation?
The second is a relation of impressions or feelings. The specific quality in the cause, the beauty of the house, the accomplishment the award represents, must produce its own distinct feeling, usually pleasure or uneasiness.
So the beautiful house makes me feel pleasure.
Exactly. And that feeling of pleasure must itself be related to the feeling of the passion you're trying to explain. Pride is a pleasurable feeling. Humility is an uneasy one. So the pleasure from the beautiful house is related to the pleasure of pride.
Ah, so it's like parallel tracks. The idea of the house connects to the idea of me. And the feeling of pleasure from the house connects to the feeling of pride.
Precisely. It's the combination, the reinforcing effect of both these relations working together that channels that general pleasure specifically into the passion of pride directed at yourself. If the house wasn't yours, no relation of ideas, or if its beauty didn't give you pleasure, no relation of impressions, you wouldn't feel pride in it.
Does that same logic apply to feelings towards other people, like love and hatred?
Yes, he uses a very similar framework. For love and hatred, the cause is typically something related to another person that gives us pleasure or uneasiness, maybe their kindness, their intelligence, their helpful actions, or even just their appearance.
So the cause produces a feeling in me.
Right, and the object of the passion is the other person. So, again, you have the double relation. The idea of the quality, like kindness, relates to the idea of the person, and the feeling of pleasure you get from their kindness relates to the pleasant feeling of love. He also adds that if the person is already related to us, like a child or a friend, that existing relation strengthens the whole process because it reinforces the connection of ideas.
Okay, this makes sense, but it feels like something's missing. How do we feel pride or love based on things that don't directly give us pleasure? Like someone's virtue might benefit others, not me. This is where sympathy comes in, right?
Exactly. Sympathy is crucial for Hume. It's the mechanism that explains how we can have passions triggered by things that affect other people.
So what is sympathy for Hume? Is it feeling sorry for someone?
Not just that, it's broader. It's the principle by which we sort of catch feelings from others. We receive their sentiments, their pleasures, their pains. We convert the idea of someone else's feeling into an actual impression or feeling within ourselves.
Like emotional contagion.
That's a good way to put it. We see someone happy, and through sympathy, we feel a spark of that happiness ourselves. We see someone suffering, and we feel a pang of their unease.
And how does that connect back to pride and love?
It allows the double relation to work even when the initial pleasure isn't ours directly. For example, we might admire someone's generosity, a virtue. We sympathize with the pleasure or benefit that their generosity brings to the people they help. That sympathetic pleasure becomes our impression.
Ah, so our sympathetic pleasure then relates to the pleasant feeling of love or esteem.
Precisely. And the idea of generosity relates to the idea of the person, double relation achieved. Similarly, we can feel pride in our own positive qualities because we sympathize with the pleasure those qualities might bring to others, or even just the pleasure we imagine they bring to ourselves. Sympathy lets us bridge the gap.
That's powerful. It suggests our emotional lives are deeply interconnected, built on sharing feelings. He also talks about comparison, though, how seeing others can sometimes have the opposite effect.
Yes, comparison plays a role too. While sympathy often connects us, comparison can sometimes create distance or even reverse the feeling. Seeing someone else enjoying great success might make our own situation feel less pleasant by contrast. Their joy could even provoke our envy or unease, a reversed sensation, as he calls it.
And what about the strength of passions? Why are some feelings just overwhelming while others are faint?
Hume looks at a few factors. He notes that related emotions tend to merge and strengthen the main passion. Uncertainty often fuels passion. Think of hope mixed with anxiety.
Like waiting for important news.
Exactly. Security or certainty can actually dampen the feeling. Novelty makes things more striking. And interestingly, he thinks the ease or difficulty of the imagination's journey affects intensity. If the mind can easily transition between related ideas, like cause and effect or things close in time-space, the conception is stronger, and the passion is likely stronger too. Difficulty weakens it.
What about hope and fear? Are they basic, standalone emotions for him?
No, he sees them as complex mixtures. They aren't simple, original passions. They arise specifically when something is uncertain.
Uncertain how?
When the mind is contemplating something, say a future event, and it's unsure whether it will happen or not, it fluctuates. It considers the possibility of it happening, which might bring joy, and the possibility of it not happening, which might bring sorrow.
So the mind bounces back and forth.
Yes, rapidly oscillating between these faint impressions of joy and sorrow. This constant flickering and blending is what creates the feeling of hope, if the joy prospect is stronger, or fear, if the sorrow prospect dominates. He also notes that a small chance of a very bad outcome can still create strong fear because the greatness of the potential evil makes the idea forceful, even if improbable.
So just like our thoughts, our feelings are built up from simpler components combined in complex ways and heavily influenced by imagination, habit, and crucially, our connection to others via sympathy.
It's a very dynamic psychological picture of our inner world.
Okay, let's move to the final section. This is where Hume takes these ideas about thought and feeling and applies them to the big questions of society and morality. Section 3. Society and Morals, Hume on Justice and Virtue. He starts by grounding morality in feeling, right? Not reason.
Yes, that's consistent with his overall approach. He argues that we distinguish vice and virtue based on the particular feelings, the sentiments they arouse in us when we contemplate them. Virtue is simply any mental quality that gives rise to a pleasing sentiment of approval. Vice causes a disagreeable sentiment of disapproval.
So moral judgments are based on taste, essentially, a kind of emotional response.
A particular kind of taste, yes, a sentiment of approbation or disapprobation.
But then he makes a really sharp turn when it comes to justice. He argues it's not a natural virtue. That seems counterintuitive.
It was certainly a radical claim. He argues that justice isn't like, say, kindness or parental affection, which seem to spring from natural instincts. He thinks our natural benevolence is too limited, mostly focused on family and friends, to be the basis for society-wide rules about property.
And pure self-interest doesn't work either. because sometimes justice demands we act against our immediate interest.
Exactly. Sometimes the just action requires you to return something valuable you found, even if you could easily keep it. Self-love alone wouldn't motivate that.
So if justice isn't natural, what is it? Where does it come from?
Hume argues it's an artificial virtue. Justice, property rights, keeping promises, obligation. These are all human inventions. They arise out of a convention or an artifice.
An artifice, like a clever trick.
More like a clever solution, developed gradually. People realize through experience that society simply can't function without stable rules about possessions. Everyone's long-term interest is served by agreeing, explicitly or implicitly, to respect certain rules. So justice emerges from perceived utility and necessity for social order.
So it's not divinely ordained or written into the fabric of the universe. It's something we collectively built.
That's his argument. Property rights aren't inherent in the objects. They are moral relationships created by this human convention, this system of justice. You can't even understand what property is without understanding the rules of justice first.
What about those fundamental laws of nature people talked about? Respecting property, transferring it by consent, keeping promises. Are those artificial too?
For Hume, yes. He sees these three as the essential rules that make society possible. But they are conventions, not commands discovered by reason or natural instinct. Their binding force, the feeling that we ought to follow them, comes from recognizing our shared interest in maintaining the stability and benefits of society.
Even promise keeping. That feels quite fundamental.
He argues even the obligation to keep a promise is artificial. There's no natural magic in the words, "I promise." The obligation arises because we've established a convention that makes promises useful and reliable tools for cooperation. Without that convention, the words would be meaningless.
That really reframes things. These pillars of social order are human constructs, designed for practical purposes.
Yes. And he offers an interesting argument for why justice seems different from natural virtues. Natural virtues, like courage or kindness, exist on a spectrum. You can be more or less courageous. But justice often seems absolute. You either own the property or you don't. You either fulfilled the contract or you didn't. He suggests this sharp, rule-based nature points to its artificial origin.
Okay, if these rules are just conventions based on mutual interest, why do we need government? Why don't we all just follow the rules because we know they're good for us in the long run?
Because of what Hume calls a fundamental infirmity in human nature. We have a strong tendency to prefer short-term, immediate gratification over long-term, distant benefits.
Like choosing the cake now even though we know we'll regret it later.
Exactly. We know upholding justice benefits everyone eventually, but the immediate temptation to grab something unfairly or shirk an obligation can be overpowering. Government arises as a remedy for this weakness.
How does government fix it?
It works by setting up a small group of people, magistrates, rulers whose immediate self-interest is tied to enforcing the rules of justice. Their power, their status, depends on maintaining order. By creating laws and punishments, they make obeying justice the nearest and most compelling interest for everyone else. Fear of punishment outweighs the immediate temptation to break the rules. Importantly, Hume sees obedience to government as a distinct obligation based on this interest in security and order, separate from the obligation to keep promises.
Okay, that makes sense practically. But even if justice is artificial, invented for utility, why do we generally feel that it's morally good to be just? Why do we approve of it? Where does the moral feeling come from?
And we circle back again to sympathy. Hume argues that sympathy is the main source of our moral approval, even for artificial virtues like justice.
How does that work, if it's artificial?
We approve of justice not just because it might benefit us individually sometimes, but because we sympathize with the enormous public good it creates. We see the peace, order, and cooperation that justice enables for society as a whole. We sympathize with the benefits this brings to countless people, and that widespread, sympathetic pleasure translates into our moral approval of justice itself.
So we feel good about justice because we feel good about the happy, stable society it helps create.
That's the core idea. For natural virtues, too, like benevolence, we approve because we sympathize with the pleasure or advantage the virtue brings, either to the person who has it or to those they interact with. He also notes we often have to correct our immediate bias sympathies by taking a more general point of view, considering the overall tendencies of character traits, but sympathy is still the engine.
Does this apply to things like intelligence or talent, too? Are those virtues for Hume?
Yes, he includes what he calls natural abilities, things like good sense, judgment, wit, even cleanliness among the qualities that command esteem and are considered virtues.
Even though they might not be voluntary. You can't just decide to be wittier.
Right. But they still significantly impact a person's life and how they affect others. They produce pleasure or utility, either for the possessor or for those around them. We approve of these qualities, often through sympathy with the advantages they bring. They make a person esteemed.
So it's a really comprehensive picture. Justice is this amazing human invention, built on interest, enforced by government because of our short-sightedness, but ultimately felt as good because of our shared capacity for sympathy with the public benefit.
It's a thoroughly naturalistic account explaining morality in society based on observable human psychology, emotions, and practical needs, without recourse to divine commands or abstract rational principles.
And how does this all tie into living a good life, being happy?
Hume definitely connects virtue with well-being. Possessing virtues, both natural abilities and social virtues like justice and kindness, tends to bring the esteem of others, which we value through sympathy, and also contributes to internal satisfaction and peace of mind. Vice, conversely, leads to disapproval and inner turmoil. The system suggests our happiness is deeply intertwined with our social nature and how we relate to and affect others.
Wow, okay. So just to recap this whirlwind tour, we've seen Hume dissect the mind, arguing our ideas are just echoes of vivid impressions. Belief is really about the feeling, the vivacity of an idea.
That cause and effect isn't logical deduction, but powerful habit, custom born from experience.
And that even our sense of a stable external world and a continuous self might be clever constructions of the imagination.
Then we dove into the passions, the double relation explaining pride and love, and the absolute centrality of sympathy in connecting our feelings.
And finally, his really radical take on justice and morality, not as God-given or discovered by pure reason, but as ingenious human conventions, artificial structures built out of self-interest and social necessity.
But gaining their moral force, their feeling of rightness, primarily through our ability to sympathize with the common good they promote.
It's a system that really puts human psychology, habit, and feeling front and center, often demoting reason from its traditional throne.
Absolutely. It forces you to look at why you believe things, why you feel things, why society works the way it does in a very different way. It's less about abstract truths and more about the mechanics of the human mind and social interaction.
It really does. You look at just, trusting that the sun will rise tomorrow or feeling proud of something you did or even just stopping at a red light and you start to see this whole complex, maybe non-obvious machinery Hume is suggesting is running underneath it all.
It shifts the whole focus, doesn't it? From what is true or right to how we come to experience things as true or right.
Which kind of leaves us with this final thought to chew on. If our most fundamental beliefs about reality, about cause and effect, about justice itself, are ultimately rooted not in absolute certainty or pure reason, but in the workings of imagination, custom, utility, and sympathy. What does that tell us about the true nature of human knowledge and society? Are they incredibly fragile constructions? Or does grounding them in these deep psychological and social forces reveal a remarkable, adaptable kind of resilience? What stands out most to you from this deep dive into Hume?